Around the Ozarks is now on your FM radio. Listen to Around the Ozarks mornings with Grace Gooley as I spotlight local people, stories, and podcasts, all while playing the country legends of the 90s and the hit makers of the 2000s. It's on the Ozarks' best country, 105.1 The Bull. It's time for Around the Ozarks Sports Scene, brought to you by Colton's Steakhouse, Thompson Sales, and Deadeye Gun and Pawn in Sparta. Here's your host, Scott Puryear.
Welcome into another edition of Around the Ozarks Sports Scene. I am Scott Puryear. As always, a big thank you to you for tuning in this week. We're going to talk Mizzou athletics with Eli Hoff, one of our radio guests frequently on the Starting Lineup show, and he is the Mizzou writer for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Eli, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Scott, thanks for having me. Fun to talk to you in a little different medium this time.
Exactly. We get to look eye to eye or stream to stream, as they may say here. But, yeah, I think it's a great chance. We don't talk a lot of Mizzou on here, and we got a lot of Mizzou fans in Southwest Missouri and a lot of good stories going on up in Columbia. So appreciate you taking a chance to visit with us, taking the time, and maybe taking a chance too, who knows. But we certainly appreciate it. And, of course, we're taping this on Wednesday. It comes out tonight. Of course, the Tigers, a big basketball win over Tennessee last night at the Mizzou Arena. When you're watching the game, there's a bracket up, or actually a graphic showing Mizzou on the bubble for the NCAA tournament. I've got to think now, after another win over a ranked team at home, that they're probably off that bubble. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. It's tough because it's not wrapped up yet, right? There's still 3 regular season games to go. Things can go wrong. But if the bracket was made right now as we're talking, I think Mizzou would be in, and probably be in relatively comfortably. Now, probably there's like a 10 seed, maybe a 9 seed, but probably a 10 seed. That's kind of what we're looking at here. But yeah, we're getting away from the Mizzou being a coin flip type discussion and starting to look at, okay, Mizzou might be able to avoid having to go to Dayton and could even be a 10 seed, maybe even a 9 seed, depending how the rest of this goes.
Well, and you look at what they have left with at Mississippi State, at Oklahoma, and then finishing up with Arkansas and Columbia. I mean, it's very, very possible they go 3-0 down the stretch. And looking at the standings right now, you got Florida with a pretty good lead up there. But a lot of teams, Mizzou's a game back out of a 10-win second place situation now. And for this team and the way they kind of looked, I just think back to the Illinois game. And the disaster that was. They've kind of come a long way, have they not?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I when I was sitting there in the arena afterwards last night was writing, that this is a very different team from where they were in December, which is not groundbreaking analysis. Like if you watched the games against Kansas or Illinois, you know that. But this is even a different team at this time of year from last year. When we saw this team at this point a year ago, we didn't really know it at the time, but they were coming down the mountain. Last year's team peaked in that game against Alabama, was ranked number 4. They beat them by 12 points in Mizzou Arena. It was a great game, but that was the high watermark of last year's team. It just so happened to be in mid-February, which is not when you want to peak. Now, this team, for all of the non-conference struggles and just how, frankly, depressing December was for a lot of Mizzou fans, they're now at a point where they're playing their best basketball now in late February. And I still think, and Dennis Gates would agree with this, they still have another level to reach. There's still ways this team can get better. So in that sense, I do think there's some reason to be optimistic.
If only they hadn't dropped that clunker against Texas at home. Mizzou optimism and the desire to look ahead might be stronger than ever right now. What happened in that game?
That's a weird one, and I look back at the game against Georgia too, and that's when they came down to one possession at the very end. That those two, I hate to play the what if game, but if either of those games go differently, it does look really different. The Texas game was just kind of an implosion in my eyes, and one of the things we can't forget with this team is it's a really inconsistent team. Like the ceiling is pretty high. The talent level is pretty high. They've gotten better, but they've been prone to that kind of clunker. It was a clunker at Alabama when they were in Tuscaloosa. I don't think anybody expected Mizzou to win that game, but you would have liked them to be a little more competitive than they were. So it's still a team prone to nights like that. But lately we've seen the last really 4 or 5 games have been a lot better, have been a lot more consistent.
I went to the Mizzou-Arkansas game in person on Saturday down at Bud Walton Arena. Great atmosphere, as it usually is on a Saturday game down there. But it was one of those games that telling my wife and son, I really have no idea what's going to happen, because both of these teams are that kind of team that you don't know game to game which one is how they're going to play, which guys are going to show up in that game, even in the first half. Mizzou was kind of having their way with Arkansas inside, Mark Mitchell, and that just couldn't stop him. Trevin Brazil was playing 3-point ball out on the perimeter and not really getting in there with his long arms to do anything. And they kind of got Mitchell figured out a little bit in the second half and held him down a little bit. And Arkansas kind of turned it on. But that's kind of what you probably expect, I would guess, in Columbia here in about another week and a half. Same type of, I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, that kind of, it doesn't really matter who's playing. I kind of walk into the arena with that feeling most nights. But yeah, I came away from that loss in Fayetteville impressed by this Mizzou team, just given the way they lost at Alabama previously. I think Arkansas is up there with some of the best teams in the SEC. Like, Florida's in a tier of its own at the top of this conference. Arkansas could be in the SEC title game. I think they're that good. So for Mizzou to be to be in the game in the first half and keep it respectable down in that arena, that environment, I think is worth something. I think Mizzou can absolutely win that game when it's in Columbia to cap off the regular season. But that's just what this team is. Mark Mitchell should be an all SEC first team player. Mizzou has enough other contributors, and now is getting someone like Trent Burns, who frankly 2 weeks ago, even less than 2 weeks ago, like a week and a day ago, I didn't think was an SEC caliber player. Now I'm starting to think, no, actually he's a core part of the rotation. It can change so quickly late in this season, even when we think we have a team figured out. So yeah, I think that game on Saturday against the Hogs showed that Mizzou can absolutely compete with any team, especially when they're on their home floor.
Yeah, it was kind of going that route with two of the more intriguing guys right now. You mentioned Trent Burns, a 7'5" redshirt freshman. First of all, if he couldn't play at all, 7'5" is going to be intriguing with anybody. But he's shown some athleticism and getting to the hole and grabbing rebounds. I think 7 last night. Talk a little bit about, what Mizzou sees in this kid going forward and the potential that Dennis Gates maybe sees even as early as this coming up postseason run.
Yeah, a lot of potential. Trent Burns has been a fascinating prospect for a while, just since he committed to Mizzou, and a lot of that has to do with the size. And he even hit a growth spurt after his high school ranks. He was listed at more like 7'2", 7'3", which still incredibly tall, but then shot up to be listed at 7'5" when he actually enrolled at Mizzou. He didn't play at all last year because of a handful of injuries that just limited him. But even at that point, you talked to members of the coaching staff and they kept throwing around the word unicorn for him, which is what you hear when you think of players like Victor Wembanyama, who he's not obviously Wemby, but you see somebody that tall with skills, and that's kind of where your mind goes. He can pass, dribble, and shoot, which is remarkable for someone of that frame. I know some of the three-pointers haven't looked great in games. He can make them. I've seen him make them in warmups. I've seen him make them in practice. I've seen him make a couple in games. You just need a little more confidence there. But where this team really needs him is just as a traditional center. He doesn't have to do anything too funky or too crazy. He needs to be able to play the minutes that Sean Phillips, the starting center, can't play because of foul trouble or rest or any of that. You need Trent Burns to be in there to get some rebounds, provide some rim protection. I mean, he can block a lot of shots without ever leaving his feet. So he should be a little more immune from foul trouble in that sense. The hands still need a little work with the rebounding, but that's coming along. But again, this is a far cry from just a couple weeks ago when he was out there struggling with turnovers so much that it looked like he wasn't going to be playable. And now all of a sudden, he's still probably the 7th or 8th guy in the rotation, but he very much deserves to be there. And Missouri's going to need him, it looks like, the rest of the way.
He wasn't much of a factor Saturday, but at Arkansas because of foul trouble. But T.O. Barrett goes wild last night. 28 points, I believe, was a career high for him. Sophomore guard. Is that another guy that could really be a big key for this Tiger team down the stretch?
Yeah, 100%. And he's another player who, in a different way, I just hadn't really expected to be contributing like this. And it's lucky for Mizzou that he has, just given the drop off that they've seen from Anthony Robinson this year, that now they have a viable inside scorer at the point guard spot. It's just not the guy they thought it was going to be. But T.O. Barrett has been just fantastic for this team in that regard. the physicality he can have around the rim, I think, is what's so valuable to this team. You saw that against Tennessee. They were just not equipped to stop him in any way. Like if he put his shoulder into somebody, he was getting space and getting a bucket there. So I think that was important. It'd be nice if he could rein in the turnovers a little bit, but I think Mizzou's willing to live with that, especially when you get games like he had against the Vols, where scoring 28 like that, and just him and Mark Mitchell both being those downhill drivers. There aren't many teams that are equipped to stop two guys of that caliber.
Those two in particular, they seem like guys that are going to be around for another couple of years and not test the portal. From what you can tell, is Mizzou going to get hit reasonably hard, not hard at all? What do you hear around the program?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tough because even the stuff I'm hearing, I just never know what to believe, frankly, with this portal stuff. And of course, everything can change when somebody gets one call with one offer from another school. I think Mizzou's hope is that T.O. Barrett is back as a starting point guard next year, and that you can pair him with Jason Crow, who's the 5-star potential one-and-done type scorer coming in from Inglewood. You know, if that's your backcourt next year, I think that you feel really good about that if you're Missouri. Now the challenge, it's going to be a different looking team next year because this is Mark Mitchell's last year. And best I can tell, there's no grounds for him to sue for eligibility or any of that stuff that you see everybody doing. I think he's going to be a clean break for him. But that's going to change the style of this team that has been built around Mark Mitchell. So you could absolutely make the case that T.O. Barrett should be the centerpiece of next year's roster build.
Barrett was a Link Academy product down here. And another one I wanted to ask about, kind of lost track of, but Aaron Rowe was down here before he went back to Father Tolton up in the Columbia area. Was he just bound to be a red shirt from the get-go this year? What happened there?
Yeah, that's what I've been hearing, was just he was in his high school career had been a little strange, where after he left Lincoln, came up to Tolton, he kind of slid in the recruiting rankings a little bit, but was committed to Mizzou, signed to Mizzou, and wanted to be a Tiger. So Mizzou was happy to take him. I'm not sure what his future holds, but this year it seemed likely it would be a red shirt. He hasn't played at this point, so would assume that's where this winds up going. He's a little undersized. Needs to put on some weight there. And frankly, I haven't seen him in a game to really be able to tell you where he stacks up against SEC caliber players, but at his size, I think it's going to be a tall task.
We talked on radio about a month ago about this recruiting class that Gates has brought in, another great one. And ESPN had him ranked number 1 in the country back in November, and I've seen other rankings anywhere, obviously in the top 10 with most of them. But when Mizzou wasn't playing well, we were concerned about if Gates was on a hot seat, would he be around to coach these guys? Would these guys even be around if Gates wasn't around? Do you feel like all that is in the rearview mirror now, and Gates is fine and everything's secure, and it's time to focus on going forward with that great group coming in?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm still, I don't know how bad this year would have needed to go for Gates to realistically be fired. I think the bigger question that was pertinent before and is still pertinent now is whether he gets a contract extension this offseason. That's one of those things we've seen it on the football side, that when you have a decent year, you kind of have to reward your coach with a contract extension now. Like it or not, that's just kind of how college sports works right now. And Gates did not get a contract extension after last year's tournament appearance. If he gets the team to the tournament this year, which, like we said, looks pretty good at this point, that's 3 tournament appearances in 4 years. That's pretty good. That's better than Missouri has really seen this century, if we're being honest. So that's something that you probably have to reward with a contract extension at that point.
And the bizarre part is we're sitting here talking about Mizzou going 3-0 and taking care of all this, maybe finishes as high as second in the league. They could also go 0-3. I mean, Mississippi State at their place, Oklahoma, which, rose up and beat Auburn in Norman last night after OU looked like they were done and tired of playing for Porter Moser. And then Arkansas coming to Columbia, which you never know. So if he were to go 0-3, do you think he maybe falls back on that hot seat again? Or
yeah, and fans would be a lot more discontent with that kind of finish. And it's a good point, especially what's interesting to me about this finish is that Mizzou has to play 3 teams that it has already played at some point this season. It's really hard to beat a team twice in college basketball, just any league, any level. That's just difficult. So that'll be interesting. We're kind of at the point where there's a chance Mizzou could go 0-3 the rest of the way and still make the NCAA tournament. That's where it would be back on the bubble, and you'd be sweating it a little bit. And it would matter what they do at the SEC tournament in Nashville. So there would be a little more pressure there. But again, I think with this recruiting class, it would have to just be terribly bad for Dennis Gates to be fired this year. And at this point, I don't know if there's a way mathematically Mizzou could finish this season bad enough to warrant that.
How would you evaluate, put a letter grade, etc., on women's basketball and Kelly Harper's first season up there? Because they have won a lot of games. They won a lot of non-conference games, but they haven't fared very well in the SEC. And is there just kind of a realization in SEC women's basketball that there's a clear defining mark between the haves and the have-nots in that conference? And, you're not going to jump up there with the South Carolinas and Texas and LSU and those folks unless you're in that realm of commitment, NIL, getting the players and all that. Is that kind of where Mizzou is? You think with Kelly Harper, it's kind of like just go be representative and don't get in trouble and let's win some games and let's have a program that people at least aren't embarrassed of. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I don't know. I think this offseason is where we're going to kind of get that tell. I think what you're describing is very much what the program was when Robin Pynchon was the coach here, that, just don't really have any issues. You win a few games against a few other bottom feeders, and that's kind of that. Mizzou deciding to move on from Pynchon at the end of her contract last year and hire somebody of Harper's caliber, I think at the time I thought it signaled a lot more ambition, partly because Kelly Harper's a good enough basketball coach that she doesn't need to take an SEC job just to take an SEC job, right? She could have gotten other jobs. She could have sat this cycle out and come back in at this time this year and taken a different job. So she evidently saw something in this program, and the program paid up to get her as the coach. She's making more than Pynchon did. So there's some investment there. The hard part is just evaluating this season. Her roster just wasn't built, and they still have a couple games to go, but just isn't built to be competitive in the SEC. There's only one front court player, one post player on the entire roster, and now she's running into some injury issues. Jordana Reisman, these last couple games, they're not competitive when they don't have a center out there. Grace Slaughter's a heck of a player. She's best as a small forward. When she's having to play the five, it gets a little tough. So this team being so undersized makes it difficult to evaluate. I think Kelly Harper's a heck of a coach from what you've seen her. I think she has maximized the roster she has this year, which is impressive. I'd give it probably a B+ in that instance, maybe even an A- in all honesty. But that's where when I say this offseason is going to be important, it's because now she has a full run up to the transfer portal where she can be having the conversations about who she wants to keep. She can be looking around at what's going to be out there. The portal this year is structured to where the NCAA tournament will end and then the transfer portal opens. So it's even a little more time there, that if she has the resources to go out and be competitive in the portal and bring in some top end players, I think you'll see a lot of improvement. But again, it's fair to question whether there is going to be that kind of resources for her to work with. We haven't seen that historically for women's basketball at Missouri, but it would not shock me if there was a little more for her to work with than there had been in the past.
And that was my next question is, Molly Miller from our neck of the woods down here, Kickapoo product, great job at drills years, turned Grand Canyon around now to Arizona State. She was being mentioned for the Mizzou job, being mentioned for the Arkansas job, but both were open. But word was kind of like that they weren't ready to commit the NIL money at either place. Do you feel like Kelly has been able to change that because of her pedigree and having been in the league, maybe get a little bit more? And I guess, where's it coming from? Because that's where we're kind of going to go with football is, where is all this cash flow from NIL from Mizzou coming from, as far as you can tell?
Yeah, well, certainly some of it can come institutionally with the revenue sharing now. Now, for Mizzou's not a school that has chosen to disclose which sports are getting revenue share or how much of that pie. So we don't know that for sure, but I'm inclined to think women's basketball is probably getting some. The bigger key for every school and every sport now is what you can secure in the third party, the kind of outside corporate investment there in your program. And that's where I think the Kelly Harper hire matters, is that she can signal that ambition externally of, hey, we want to be something in women's basketball. She's someone who, can get in a room with, whether it's recruits or donors or whoever, and kind of sell them on a vision for what the program can be. She has the Sweet 16s, and what she did down at Missouri State, what she did at Tennessee. what she did even as a player in Tennessee, I think that actually resonates a lot, given that she played for Pat Summitt. All of that can work in her favor. But again, at some point, if there's only so much you can do without money. So we'll have to see how much money there actually is for her this year.
Did they pick up some big signees, kind of like Gates did, or not? Or are they kind of waiting for the portal, you think, too, to see what's there?
No, she actually took a pretty big high school class. I think it's 5 players signed in the high school ranks, and 3 are real high end, like top 100 type recruits.
Nice.
Which again signals that there's some roster resources there. So I don't know how much of a leap is possible from year 1 to year 2. We're all inclined to think with the transfer portal that it's magical and anything can happen because we see what Indiana football does.
Yeah.
It's not always that linear. You certainly want to see progress, but it feels like that if she can have Grace Slaughter back for 1 more year and have a decent high school class year and get 1 or 2 pieces from the transfer portal, that's where I think Mizzou starts being able to get out of that bottom class. Again, it's not going to be LSU, it's not going to be South Carolina, it's not going to be Texas, but I think there's a middle ground that Mizzou can find, and I feel like that's attainable as early as next year.
Get to like where OU is now, and where Tennessee used to be. It looks like their magic has slipped away a little bit there as well. But Mizzou baseball underway now, off to a 6-2 start. They haven't exactly beat Tennessee and LSU and those types of people here in the early going, but they've played teams that they need to get off to a good start against, and they are picked for last in the SEC this year. Is there hope for more from this Missouri baseball program this spring?
Yeah, there is, and of course, more is relative when we're talking about Mizzou baseball, right? Let's be clear about that. But Carrick Jackson, the head coach or manager, had an interesting tone when we talked to him before the season started, before they went down to Florida, that he thought he finally had the right mix of players and coaches in place to be able to be competitive this year. And I think one of the biggest changes we've seen, made a change at pitching coach, and now Drew Dickinson is in as the pitching coach. And I saw a stat yesterday that Mizzou has already matched last season's tally for the number of starting pitching outings where the starter went 5 innings with 1 or fewer earned runs allowed. It's like 2 weeks into the season, and Mizzou's already beat what it did last year with that. So a little better pitching, I think, will help. The team just got ravaged by injuries last year too, which didn't help. So again, we're not talking about a team that's going to go out and beat Tennessee or probably be in Omaha, but I think it's a team that can at least pick up some SEC wins here and there, maybe pick up a series or 2 more. Ideally avoid some of those embarrassing non-conference losses against schools you haven't heard of. They already had one of those in the opener, but since then they've been able to take care of business, and they beat Pine Bluff, I think 15-1 yesterday. So there's a little more to like there. I think there's better pieces, but again, it's all relative with Mizzou baseball.
Is baseball kind of in that same boat as women's basketball in terms of the SEC? Because you have the schools that really try hard because they've done it so well for so many years. And is there just an admittance on Mizzou's part that we can't be there because we're so far north, or the facilities, and then you see stories about how poorly it's funded. What do you think the administration's attitude is toward baseball?
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. And just the SEC emphasis on college baseball fascinates me too. I grew up in Minnesota. I'm a Big Ten kid. That's what I grew up watching. Yeah. College baseball means nothing there. Like it happens, but it's not even on your radar. It's no offense to like tennis, but it's like college tennis up there. It happens. But down here it's different, right? And I guess I shouldn't really say that because Missouri kind of subscribes to that northern model of it a little bit more, but you see some of these other SEC ballparks and they're better than some double and triple A stadiums out there. It really is like that. Some of it is the weather in Missouri. Some of it's just the facility, like Taylor Stadium, if you've been in there, is not, certainly by SEC standards, not that great of a ballpark. Even by other standards, it's not that great of a facility. There's not going to be as much available in roster resources and all of that. But this comes back to a bigger picture thing. When you're an athletic department like Missouri, you're not Alabama, you're not Texas, you're not LSU, where you have where you have that big of a budget, Missouri has to pick and choose sports a little bit. So football, we've seen, is the clear number one. And some of that is a business decision that if you're decent in football, that brings in a lot of revenue. If you're very good in football, that brings in a ton of revenue that can trickle down to other things. Mizzou has to care about men's basketball because this is Missouri, and we know the history there, and there's value in that. From that point on, you can really only, I feel like, pick a couple of other sports. So gymnastics has gotten great returns at Missouri. Shannon Welker, the gymnastics coach, is the most accomplished on campus. He's doing great things there. From there, then do you put that investment in women's basketball and Kelly Harper? Do you put it into baseball, where that's the third sport at a lot of SEC schools, but at Missouri, it's maybe fifth or sixth. Brian Smith has a great track record with the wrestling program that you want to encourage. Softball is having a down year this year, but has been decent in the past. That's where it becomes picking and choosing, that you don't have unlimited money to give to all of these programs. And it just seems like baseball has been one that kind of gets the short end of the stick when you look at how much it costs to be competitive in the SEC in baseball, and just where Mizzou is at from a facility standpoint.
We've talked about it in the past, again, on our radio interviews with you, but Texas Tech, it's very clear. Cody Campbell, the oil billionaire there, is pumping his personal money into there, and we see Mark Cuban with what he's doing with Indiana. Cronkies, Lorries, any of these famous Mizzou families, are they contributing here? And where is the money coming from? Corporate Mizzou fans, individuals? If you had to guess on the NIL side, because Eli Drinkwitz, for all the other knocks against him, he's figured out how to go get guys in the portal and get them paid. Yeah.
So the big battleground here is corporate money coming in. Now, donations are still very important, especially to the North End Zone project there. A lot of that is funded with kind of your traditional donations. That's, a person with a lot more in their checking account than you or I have, Scott. They get to write big checks and get their name on things like gates to the stadium. So that's how that part works. But what Mizzou and every other school is targeting is big name companies that can sign athletes to endorsement or marketing deals. So this is where in the fall, when Drinkwitz's name was embroiled in all the will he stay, will he go stuff, he was asking for some of the Fortune 500 companies in Missouri, most of which are in St. Louis, asking for them to invest in some of these marketing deals. Now, the hard part, a lot of companies that don't have a connection to a university don't see a ton of return on investment, because they look at it as, why should I sign this football player to a 6-figure marketing deal when he's only been on campus for 3 months and will be gone as soon as the football season ends? Like, it's tough to sell that. What you do sometimes get is you get a Cody Campbell or a Mark Cuban or Larry Ellison at Michigan, or at some of these other schools, somebody who owns a local business that they're an alum of the university and a fan, and they want to just, basically, they don't care about return on investment. It's a glorified donation through their company. That's what you need a lot of to be able to compete. So there's, I think a good example here in Columbia, you have MPIX that's owned by Richard Miller, who's a wealthy individual, that MPIX is able to work with athletes and work with the athletic department and get some of that NIL in there. So that's where that comes into play a little bit. It's complex. We don't get to see the numbers. We don't see the contracts, any of that stuff at all. It all plays out behind the scenes, but that's at sort of a macro level what these programs are looking for.
Cronkies, Lorries, no.
I've seen Bill Laurie around basketball games, but again, we don't have the donor role to know for sure or how much.
Yeah. The dust has settled now clearly on football with the portal season and all that goes with it. Your evaluation of what Drinkwitz and the Tigers were able to do to fill some holes, to keep the guys they want to keep, and where should the optimism level be going into this fall for Mizzou football?
Yeah, well, and also going into spring ball starts on Friday this week. It's crazy.
They won't lose any games in the spring.
Well, yeah, you sure hope not. But South Carolina decided to play a 3-on-3 basketball tournament and lost one of their starting linemen to injury. So you can lose in spring ball. It's difficult, but you can. I think looking back at the portal window, it was fine. There are some good additions and some reasons for optimism. I still like the decisiveness with which Eli Drinkwitz got Austin Simmons, the Ole Miss quarterback. The fact that was really teed up from the jump, I think was a good reflection of Simmons wanted to be in Columbia and Drinkwitz and company wanted Simmons. So you hope that's a better partnership than it was with Bo Perbula last year. There's some good additions on the defense, a couple good, long, athletic cornerbacks from Oregon. Robert Woodyard, who's a proven linebacker from Auburn, ought to be good. The offensive line pieces, we'll see. There are enough bodies that you have to think Mizzou will find something out of that. Getting Caden Lee, a slot receiver, he'll be good. He knows Austin Simmons from Ole Miss. They're good buddies, so that's a nice connection. The bigger thing for Mizzou is the returners. It's having Ahmad Hardy back. You've got a returning All-American. I wrote earlier today, I don't think Mizzou has had a returning player of his ilk since Chase Daniel in what would have been like 2008 Chase Daniel after that 07 season he had. That's what you're bringing back in Ahmad Hardy. So again, I think it was fine. You maybe would have liked to see one or two more big ticket names coming in, but when you factor in the retention, I think it looks a little better. And that's where the excitement comes in, is that this isn't a whole scale refresh. There's some things Mizzou was able to bring back from last year.
2 contract extensions and raises in about a 6-month period for Drinkwitz. Still not beating the cream of the crop in the SEC. 0-6 against ranked opponents. Still hasn't beaten an SEC opponent with a winning record. How loud will that cry be this fall if that doesn't change? And what do you do? I mean, you're not going to fire him, and so what? Because you look on paper and it screams 8-4, 7-5 again with the games that they've got. Kind of give us your assessment of where Mizzou fans are with Eli Drinkwitz. Obviously, the administration thinks highly of him because they keep paying him more to stay. Kind of what do you think about the whole situation? What does he need to do this year?
Yeah, I win a big game or two. Like I think it really is that simple. Just to kind of get that camel off his back, because it is something that the fan base is conscious of. We saw that a lot last season, where people, the charm of the STP is something to prove. 2023 breakout that wore off last season. That's gone now. I think Mizzou fans are happy he stayed, especially given how the rest of the coaching carousel played out. I don't think anybody wanted to be involved in that who didn't have to be. So again, I think Mizzou fans are glad he's around, but I'm sure the second this team gets down in an SEC game, there's going to be some of that noise creeping out there again. And so the onus is on him to win those big games, to prove that this can be better than just 8 wins or 7 wins. You certainly don't want to take a step back from where it is. He for better or worse has raised the bar for himself in this program. Now you reap what you sow in that instance. But I'm glad you noted the administration element of this. They're enamored with him. That's the entire time. The whole rumors of him looking at other jobs are playing out. Every time I talk to anybody in the administration or close to the administration, that's what I kept hearing. They think he's a coaching prodigy. He'll deliver an NCAA title. He can win the SEC. He can win. Like they really are totally bought in to him and believe in him. It's just the everyday fan, or the on Twitter fan, who I think is a little less bought in right now. So that's an interesting dynamic. It's going to lead to certainly some complaints, but probably not an actual huge amount of pressure with his job, because again, I don't see how they fire him. Frankly, it feels like some kind of administrative punishment for him would just be not getting a contract extension, because he keeps getting those. So I guess if it goes south, there won't be a contract extension for him. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, I think bottom line, to answer your question, win a few big games. I shouldn't say a few. Win 1 or 2 big games, and I think the needle will move for this fan base.
Yeah, we're going to pay you exactly what we said we're going to pay you. Gosh dang it. Yeah. Do you look at that schedule and see somewhere in that 9-3, 8-4, 7-5 range is probably most realistic?
Yeah, I think so. It's a tougher schedule than last year. You have another SEC game in there. You're at Kansas versus hosting the Jayhawks. It still should be a win, but it's a little more difficult there. So I think there's possibility for Mizzou to get up to 10 wins again. But I have a feeling when I sit down this summer to dig through rosters and depth charts and really come up with something, I'll probably be setting it, 8.5 wins as the line.
One of those swing games for them is going to be that Halloween game in Fayetteville against Arkansas. I mean, we don't know what the Hogs are going to look like with Ryan Silverfield now. You got to assume they're going to be a little bit better, because it couldn't get much worse, at least in the final few minutes of any game that they played. But that would be one that might be one of those swing. And then OU coming to Columbia. They played them tough last year. They beat him 2 years ago when Jackson Arnold said here. here's the ball, and so, but that's the SEC, a lot of swing games up and down through that schedule, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And those games will be interesting just being in different spots on the calendar where it's no, I think some folks are going to be surprised when we're talking about Mizzou playing Arkansas and it's October and not Thanksgiving week. That's going to, not that it's a super long-standing tradition, but I at least had gotten kind of used to that. So that'll feel a little weird. It'll be a little weird for OU to be in that last week slot for Mizzou as well. But yeah, both those games are going to be important ones. You look at a game against Texas, that's I think a national title contender, but that would be a massive win. Having A&M again as a permanent opponent or permanent rival, whatever they're calling it now, that's going to be a swing game. Those will all be difficult. 2 games in the state of Mississippi early on as well. We don't really know what Ole Miss is going to look like because it looks like Trinidad Chambliss is going to be the quarterback there, but who knows? There's so many moving pieces with every SEC team this year, it feels like, or this offseason, that it's going to be a really interesting slate.
Do you think was that both schools moving that off the last weekend with Missouri and Arkansas, or did one or the other just say, look, hey, it's not a rivalry? I mean, how do you think that came about? Because it looks like they're trying to make OU Missouri that game now, right?
Yeah, they are. I think it was a few things. So the bottom line or the last call on it was the SEC, since the SEC sets that schedule. And I guess I'm sure ESPN maybe has a voice in the room because they have all the SEC games. Never sure how that works. But it was probably a few things. Mizzou and Arkansas, the games hadn't been particularly entertaining or compelling in recent years. Like it's not like it was a fantastic TV product. It's not like it was the world's greatest rivalry that was happening there either. Now, not to say Mizzou and Oklahoma is all that much better. I think if you polled Mizzou fans, it maybe depends on kind of their age, but if they're Mizzou fans who were around for the Big 8 or the Big 12, they probably have a little bit stronger dislike for Oklahoma than they do for Arkansas. So it makes a little sense there. Now, every Oklahoma fan I talk to tells me, well, we didn't even think about Missouri. So I don't know there. It's better for Oklahoma. I think they've been playing LSU in that last week slot, which it's not like that's just a nothing burger game in terms of rivalry. So I guess a little better with Mizzou and Oklahoma there. But you're right. It does feel like they're trying to kind of emphasize that Mizzou-Oklahoma tie, which just goes back to like it's an uneasy fit for these old Big 8, Big 12 teams in the SEC. So I guess they just have to stick together.
Very good. Well, Eli, again, we always appreciate your time and your knowledge about Mizzou sports. Thanks for educating me and our listeners, and we'll catch you again soon on the radio, okay?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, Scott. This was a lot of fun.
You bet. Thanks, Eli. We'll talk soon.
Thanks.
Eli Hoff, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch beat writer for Mizzou Sports, and does such a tremendous job. We love having him on, and he's right there in Columbia, always with a finger on the pulse of what's happening with Tigers athletics. Well, this podcast would not be possible without our great sponsors. We have 3 of them we want to recognize. Thompson Sales. They're located at 1555 East Independence in South Springfield. They've been in business since 1919, and Thompson Sales is your home for the largest selection of Cadillac, Buick, and GMC cars and trucks, new and used, and a great service department to take care of that vehicle from start to finish until you're ready to trade it back in again at Thompson's. I've done that since I arrived in Springfield back in the early 80s. I've gone to Thompson's because they treat you like family, and they always will as long as the family is still running Thompson Sales. So big thanks to the Thompson boys because they've been dealing since 1919. Also, thanks to Colton Steakhouse of Springfield. We joke that Colton's is at 2020 East Independence, just down the street from Thompson Sales. Go buy a car or truck. Go celebrate at Colton's with a great steak, barbecue, their burgers, their salads. Got the hot rolls and butter, the cinnamon butter, the fresh peanuts. It's all good at Colton Steakhouse. Lunch or dinner, stop in and tell our friend Thomas Orr hello. They are at 2020 East Independence of Springfield. That is Colton Steakhouse. And finally, Deadeye Gun in Sparta. You can check out their store at 7483 Main Street in Sparta, right there on the main drag in town. And you can also visit their website at deadeyegunsupply.com to check out their immense selection of all the ammunition, the firearms, pistols, rifles. They've got it there at Deadeye Gun. Big thanks to Jonathan and his team at Deadeye for their sponsorship of Around the Ozarks sports scene. That's going to do it for this week's edition. Again, big thanks to Eli Hoff. We will see you next week on Around the Ozarks sports scene.